Hey, welcome back. A lot of you showed interest in the Copilot video that I made a few weeks ago, and today I want to show you an extension to Copilot called Copilot Labs. It allows for quick translation of code, brushing, documenting, test creation, and a variety of other things. And it does it in a way that makes the process much easier than if you had to query Copilot to do it yourself. So let's take a quick look. So there's a couple things that you need to do before you can get started with GitHub Copilot Labs. First of all, you've got to use VS Code for this. So if you're using a different IDE that Copilot supports, unfortunately right now Copilot Labs only supports VS Code. So that's the first thing. Second thing, you got to have an active Copilot subscription. If you don't have that, it's I think $10 or $12 a month. It's really affordable. So you'll need to get one of those. You can also do a free trial, and I mentioned that in my other video about Copilot, which I'll link to above. And lastly, you have to agree to the terms that GitHub Next puts out in order to use Copilot Labs. This is an additional piece of software, so there's some additional terms involved with using that. So this is GitHub Next website, and this tells you some of the things that Copilot Labs can do. So code explanation, code translation, IDE brushes, and test generation. So very cool. It shows you a little video here, some clips of stuff that it's doing, and it's very, very cool. We're going to look at that firsthand. So if you want to start using Copilot Labs, if you have all of those prerequisites met, you can come and sign up for Copilot Labs here on the GitHub Next website. So if I click that, I'll have to sign into GitHub, and it will add you to a wait list. In my experience, I didn't have to wait at all. It just immediately put me through and I was able to get it. But your mileage may vary on that. Download GitHub Copilot Labs. You need to scroll down until you find a link here. You can click on this. So you'll see this sign up for Copilot Labs button. Just down here below there is a link to GitHub. Well, it's actually Visual Studio Marketplace, where you can install Copilot Labs. And again, this is an extension for VS Code. Once you install that, you will have to go over to VS Code, get the extension installed there, which this will link to when you click this install button. And then you'll have to sign in and authenticate with your Copilot subscription that you already have, which will be associated to your GitHub account or a GitHub account that you're using. So once you have all of that done, you can start using the tool. And so what I'm going to do now is switch over to VS Code and show you a couple of the ways that you can use this tool really quickly, and how it can make your Copilot usage much more efficient. Alright, so here we are, VS Code, and once you get the Copilot Labs extension installed, you're going to see that pop up on your navigation blade over here, or app blade, I don't know what they call this thing. Anyway, you're going to see this little icon pop up, and when you click it, you get 4 different sections here. So you got the explain, language translation, brushes, and test generation. And we're going to go through and look at each of those. My experience so far is that they've been decent. The idea here being that it's basically just a presentation layer for Copilot. So it does your querying for you in some circumstances, depending on what you're trying to achieve. It also has the ability to quickly explain code and translate code for you without you having to query Copilot to do that yourself with inline comments and things like that. So it's pretty cool. Now I will say, Copilot is still here. It's working as expected. So like here I have a new Python file that I just started. And so if I were to start writing a script, Copilot is going to work the same way it always did. So maybe I do, L1 is equal to an empty list, L2 is equal to an empty list. Maybe we're going to do like an algorithm for happy numbers or something, right? So let's say for I in range, and I'll do 1 to 3, let's do 0 to 300. So again, you can kind of see that Copilot is still doing its thing. It's giving me suggestions, and maybe I want to use those, maybe I don't. None of that has really changed. We're going to talk about when to use Labs and when to just stick with Copilot. All right. So again, it's not like Copilot Labs replaces Copilot, it just enhances it, and it makes some functions of Copilot easier to use. So if I were to start to write this algorithm out, let's say we're searching for happy numbers between 0 and 300, for example. So I could do E or A is equal to I divided by 100, and B is equal to I divided by 10 minus A times 10. And then, yeah, that's correct. Copilot working the way that we want to do there. Let's do N is equal to 0. And while that's true, A is equal to A to the second power. B is equal to B to the second power. C is equal to C to the second power. N is equal to N plus 1. That's true. T is equal to A plus B plus C. And if T is equal to 1, then yeah, append and then break. If N is greater than or equal to, I don't know, 50, append to list 2. We don't want to append N though, we want to append I. And A is equal to T divided by 100, B is equal to T divided by 10 minus A times, yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, you know, Copilot again, really awesome. If you're not using Copilot, you've got to start. It's really great. And maybe we do a print of L1. Okay, so I don't know, you know, this is just a basic start to an algorithm to calculate happy numbers in a range, or to find happy numbers in a range and write them to a list. This works the same way it always would with Copilot. So if I do a control enter, it's going to come up with additional things that I might want to do. And so that hasn't changed, right? That hasn't changed at all. But we do have the Copilot Labs extension installed, so we can do some other stuff. So if I want to go over here and click on Copilot Labs, I can now ask it to explain things. So maybe if I highlighted these two blank list definitions, and I go to explain, it's going to show me that code that I have highlighted. I have some options here, right? Code does the following. Show example code, custom, I'm not sure what that does. But if I just say explain code, oh, you can use stops in here too. This is an interesting idea, right? So you can tell it to stop at a certain thing. And in this case, it would be another code comment, or an inline code comment. We're not going to go into that right now. But let's just see what it does with L1 equals blank list, L2 equals blank list. Okay. So there's the explanation for the code that I highlighted, right? L1 is the list of the first line of the input, which is the number of elements on the list. L2 is the list of the second line of the input, which is the elements of the list. L1 and L2 are initialized as empty lists at first. That is true, right? So it was able to, it's not like this is very difficult code to understand, but, you know, for those two things, it was able to explain what was happening. So why don't we try the same thing with this section? Okay, so the first line is an example of how to print out the integer value of a variable, which is 0. The second line is an example of how to print out the integer value of a variable, which is 1. So this is not accurate. All right, so this is not what is happening in here. We are just defining some rules in terms of what's happening inside this loop. So again, your mileage may vary with some of these things. Let's see if we change this to say code does the following in English. What does it do there? Okay, so this one's a little bit closer to what we would expect to see. So we say, you know, what is this section of our code doing? It says it sets the variables T, A, B, C, and N to 0. Technically, I guess that's true. It sets the variable I to 0 and then to 1. It adds 1 to the variable I and then 2 and so on until it reaches 300. It sets the variable T to the value of I, divides I by 100, and sets the variable A to the result, and so on and so forth. So this is a little bit closer to what we would expect to see in an accurate explanation of the code. If we ask it again, does it give us a different result? It does. So you can see here how there's some variability in the results that you get back, and that's kind of the same experience that you're going to get with Copilot itself, right? Or any of these other GPT products. You don't get the same answer even with the same query parameters every time, because the algorithm is running a little bit differently each time, right? The model is processing your query input a little bit differently. And so you're going to have to still kind of understand what is going on if you want to, really feel confident in, say, turning these into code comments or explanations for a particular part of your script. Be careful with that. You can't just trust that everything it gives you is accurate, just the same way as any of the other GPT products, as I mentioned. But this can be helpful in a situation like this where the developer didn't give you any insight as to what's going on, right? Like, say you got handed this Python script and you didn't have a clue what it was doing. This could give you some idea as to what you may be trying to achieve. If I were to highlight the entire thing here and ask Copilot what it does, it gives you some more context, right? And it actually goes through and explains all of the section that's happening under the while true area, right? So this can be really, really helpful if you don't understand what a piece of code is doing. Don't rely on it to be 100% accurate, but again, this is just to give you some context and maybe get you started down the right path. This is exactly like what I discussed in my previous Copilot video, where I compared ChatGPT and Copilot, which, when should you use which in which cases and so forth. And again, the summation of that video is that these things aren't perfect, but they get you going in a direction. They can help you with a starting point that maybe you didn't have before. So that's how it does explaining the code in Copilot Labs. Let's look at language translation. So I could take this same code and I can highlight this whole thing, and then I can tell it to translate the code. So this is really useful because it's just a much faster way of translating code than trying to query Copilot or ChatGPT or something else to do it yourself using inline code comments, or of course in ChatGPT, the chatbot interface. So you've got a whole list of different languages here that you can translate to, and I found it to be fairly accurate. Now, I'm not a real programmer per se, so I have to kind of hunt and peck, if you will, to kind of figure out if these translations are accurate and if the output actually works the same way that the good code going in does. But if we take a look at this as, like, let's say translate it to C#. Okay, and so it took a stab at translating this to C#. And I mean, again, I don't know C#, so I don't know how to know whether this is accurate or not, but looking at it, the logic that's happening in the code here looks to be similar to the logic that I have in my source Python. So if you had a need to quickly translate a piece of code, and again, you don't want to try to throw an entire script in here probably, or an entire algorithm or something, it's not going to work with a huge volume of information. The idea here is, if you have bits and pieces of code that you want to use somewhere else, maybe you're coding something in a different language and you want to just grab this one piece of logic out of some other source and translate it into the language that you're coding in, then this could be a really helpful tool to do that. So I could then just, copy this, paste it into another file or into this file or whatever I wanted to do. So very cool feature, translating code on the fly into different languages. And again, you could do this in Copilot. You could say, hey, inline code or inline comment, translate this code to C#, and then it would synthesize some solutions for you that may or may not be accurate. This kind of does that work for you, which is another time saver. All right, so next up on the list is brushes. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these because it would just take too long, and I don't see a point. In fact, my code here is not going to be conducive to some of these tools, like adding types or chunking, for example. But we can talk about each of them and what they do. So readable, right? Make this code more readable. If you highlight something and you click readable, then if that code was really complex or just tough to understand or not formatted correctly, then it might be able to help you make it more readable. It might put in inline code comments for you to help you understand what's happening. Add types. Okay, so it looks like it added list int. So in this case, types must mean like schema types, almost like data types. In my case, this is a list of integers, L1. So, maybe that's helpful if you need to know what types of data you're working with in your code. I'm going to undo that. Fix bug does exactly what you would think it would do, which would be to find bugs inside of your code. So if I had a bug in here somewhere, I could highlight the code that I wanted to check. I could hit fix bug, and it would probably point out any bugs that I had or just correct them and let me know which ones it corrected. Debug would be, if the code is very difficult to debug for some reason, then it could potentially make changes to your existing code to make it easier to debug. I don't know exactly how it does that or what it does in that process, but I think that's the idea behind debug. Clean would be to clean the code up. So if you had really messy code, maybe you inherited a really messy script or a messy algorithm, this might be able to help you clean that up. List steps is going to be more of like a documenting type function. So if I went ahead and highlighted, let's just highlight the whole thing. If I hit list steps, you can see this little guy spinning up here. This is how you know it's working. So list steps, it took that entire code block and it gave me an inline comment for every applicable section that it thought needed one. And so this is pretty useful, right? Like it just explained the entire algorithm, the entire part of this algorithm for me. Create to empty list to store numbers that are and aren't happy. Interestingly enough, it knew that I was looking for happy numbers, which I think is very, very clever that it figured that out. Loop through all the numbers from 0 to 300, store the number in a temporary variable, extract hundreds, tens, and ones place of the number, create a counter for the number of steps, and then loop until the number is 1 or the counter reaches 50. That's exactly what is happening, right? So very, very handy. Now, again, make sure you're checking its work. Don't just assume that it's going to get everything right in your code when you're using this to document or create code comments. But you can use it as a starting point. Nobody likes documenting. It takes forever. It's really kind of frustrating work. And it can add a lot of time to your development process. So, I recommend using this. It's a lot faster than throwing this over into ChatGPT, for example, and asking it to put in inline code comments. And, it also understands the context of the language that you're in VS Code. So if you're in Python and you have your file set to Python, for example, you're writing in Python, it's going to know that, and it's going to pass that context off to Codex when it asks Codex to, put in these inline code comments. So very, very, very cool stuff. Make robust. So the idea there would be to, if you had maybe some really condensed or like difficult to understand code or sections of code, if you make them more robust, maybe they would be easier for you to kind of understand what they're doing. I think that's the idea behind this one. I've not used this one myself, but typically I'm trying to go the other direction and make code more efficient and less robust, but to each their own. It's there if you want to use it. Chunk. So if I had a really dense code block, I could use this chunk function to break the code apart into smaller chunks to make them a little bit easier to digest, a little bit easier to read and understand. And then document is kind of similar to list steps, but I think for document it's going to spit out like potentially one big code comment that kind of explains the entirety of the code. Let's just undo those previous code comments and let's try document and see what it does here on this. Interesting. I don't know exactly what just happened there, but Yeah, I don't have an explanation for that. I don't know what this is. It looks like it's importing some libraries and things. But if somebody knows, put it down in the comments, because I'm curious what that is. So I thought document would actually document the code. It actually spit out an entire set of additional code definitions, it looks like. So I'm a bit confused by that. Let me know if you know what just happened there. But I think the intent here is the document brush should do something sort of similar to what list steps does. And then finally we have custom. So custom is the ability to define your own custom brushes. So if you have some way of doing something with brushing in your IDE or in VS Code in this case that this does not handle, you can potentially create your own kind of brush definitions here. I haven't played with this. I don't know how it works, but it's there. Again, let me know in the comments if you're using the custom brushes in Copilot Labs, how you're doing them, and what you're using them for. I'd be very interested to hear that. Okay, so the last thing that Copilot Labs can offer is a test generation function. So this is only supported for JavaScript and TypeScript. I actually do have some other code open over here so that we could test this. I have a piece of HTML here with an embedded, some embedded JavaScript code that creates a spinning cube. I can show you what that looks like. It looks like that. So I've got a function in here, but my script starts here. So what I will do is just highlight this entire script section, and I'll copy this out, and let's go over and create a new file, which is JavaScript. And I'll paste that in. And I'll go ahead and format that. And let's see. Okay, so then I've highlighted the entire thing here. We're in a JavaScript file now. And it says, please select a function in order to generate tests. So it wants to do a function by function analysis here to create tests, which I think makes total sense. So if I come here and I highlight, I can just highlight actually just the word function for this time now loop. It detects the entire function, which is very cool. And then I can hit suggest new test. And then it's going to spit out a test for me, a way for me to try out that function. Now, I don't know if this is going to work or not. I don't know exactly what the use case for this particular test is going to be. But we could try to run it and see what happens. Could not find enclosing package. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. I don't know what it means by that. I didn't really expect that to work. I have a feeling that you pro devs out there are going to find a lot more value in the test generation than I do. But I can definitely see it being a requirement to have some sort of test cases against your code when you're writing it. So this might be able to assist you in creating those. And if so, I would say that's a fairly powerful tool. The other thing I want to point out is that each of these sections have a feedback area. So you can say, hey, this test is incorrect, it's unhelpful, or it's great. I recommend using that. You're helping them train the models, you're helping them improve the features of this product when you give them feedback. And so I try to always give feedback when I know what the answer is, right? In this case, I don't know if this is a valid test or not, so I don't want to give any feedback because I don't really know. If it might be good and I just don't know it. It might be wrong. I don't know. So, when you know, use it. Give the developers something to work with, help them train their models and get better so that these tools can make us more efficient. So now let's take a second and talk about when to use Copilot Labs and when to just use straight up Copilot. First and foremost, Copilot Labs, remember, it's an extension to Copilot. It is a presentation layer. It is a sort of a set of shortcuts, if you will, to quickly query Codex and use Copilot in a more efficient way. Some things that it can do, right? We looked at how it can explain code, translate code, kind of clean up some of your code or document your code. Those are the situations where you want to use Copilot Labs because it's just going to be faster than trying to query Copilot directly to do those things for you. So in those situations when there's a piece of functionality in Copilot Labs that lets you very quickly do something that Copilot could also do, that's when you want to use Copilot Labs. If you're looking for an entirely new piece of code, for example, like if you need a new script to calculate happy numbers between 0 and 300 or whatever the case may be, like we just did, that's when you would rely really heavily on straight up Copilot. You would create a new Python file, put a code comment in there and say, I need a script for finding happy numbers in this range, for example. You could grab those solutions, use them, accept them, bring them into your file, and then you could use Copilot Labs to document those if they weren't already fully code commented, for example. You could clean them up because there is some sloppy code out there, that Copilot could potentially return to you. If you use these things in combination with one another, I think that's where you're going to see the best results. Rely on Copilot for what it's best at, which is generating new code based on input queries, or helping you with particular sections of your code. If you have some math or something you don't know how to do, allow Copilot to do that work, and then use Copilot Labs to kind of put the finishing touches, put the polish on the product that you're outputting. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Really highly recommend using Copilot Labs if you're already using Copilot and if you're using VS Code as your IDE. To me, it's a no-brainer to have these things working together. And I think you're going to really see some awesome results with that. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know about other topics related to Copilot that you would like to hear about or like to see a video about, or maybe an instructional video. I'm open to suggestions. And thank you for taking the time to watch this video. This is Doing It with AI. I'm Daniel LeMay, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.